Huge congratulations once again. And we begin this debate by calling on the Prime Minister. Biser, here.
I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. How we treat industrial animals in the status quo is the moral equivalent of how slaves were treated by colonial masters in the 18th century. We believe that any effort to reduce the suffering of creatures that live lives of chronic emotional, mental, and physical pain and lives of no choice and agency is something that is worth doing. 3 points of setup. First, on why we can adapt. Pretty simple economical analysis. The demand for food is inelastic in nature, which means when the industry is abolished because people no longer want to consume those animals, this means that people will continue to buy other products, which means the profits and revenue goes towards other sectors. The employability likely spreads towards other sectors. We're completely fine with biting the bullet as to why this transition is going to be short-termistic. Even if it's painful, I just don't fucking care. The second thing is why the industry can never be ethical in nature. There are multiple reasons as to why this is the case. The first one is that they will never wish to transition towards eating less meat, the vast majority of the population. First, because it's engraved in many cultures, which means people just enjoy it and it's tied to cultural traditions. Secondly, it's simply more convenient for many people to get protein to meat because they selfishly conveniently prioritize their own needs. Thirdly, in many cases, there are counter movements to veganism that are very annoying online, like keto people, carnivore people, alternative health people that are either A, contrarian in nature, which gets them a lot of views online, or B, in many cases are funded by the billions of dollars worth of the meat industry and the dairy industry in order to preserve the lifestyle habits of those people. The final thing I would like to say is that the design of those systems, of those industrial plants, is likely to be ones that maximize the suffering. There are multiple reasons as to why this is the case. The first and most obvious ones, the workers there work with hundreds of thousands of animals. They have no individual interactions, nor the time for individual interactions, nor do they care about the animals because they're highly desensitized to the type of work. Secondly, in the vast majority of the cases, there are inherent problems with the process itself that lead to moral harms upon the animals. That is to say, you cannot avoid separating a mother or cow with her children, all right? This is an inherent part of the process. Thirdly, there are inherent parts that are violent in nature. That is to say, the process through which you kill the animals, the process through which you extract their skin, the process through which you milk them on the daily in order to get products, all right? Fourthly, in many cases, profit incentives are maximally aligned with causing suffering because it's simply more convenient and more effective. That is to say, in the vast majority of the cases, animals are cramped in tight spaces, multiple of them, which means that they are feeling constantly overwhelmed and anxious in an environment that is unnatural and in many cases, experience horrible emotional pain. The reason as to why this is done is simply it's because it's more convenient, right? You save on space, you can rely on economics of scale. The obvious response is that some people may have a preference to do ethnical farming, right? Simply because, they want to feel moral. But the problem is this is a minority of the population because industrial farming through its economics of scale is significantly cheaper per unit, which means outside of hippies that care about veganism, the average person simply does not give a flying fuck. Even if it is true that they can mitigate this point, we believe every animal that is saved in every future generation of animals that is not born is something that is worthy. Now, second point of constructive. Why should we care about animals? Multiple reasons as to why this is the case. The first and most obvious ones is that they possess many human-like qualities that are highly similar to us. That is to say, animals tend to have differences in the way they behave, which implies that they have personalities. If you have ever interacted with a cat, with a dog, with a farm animal in a village, you intuitively know that as a person. They have clear preferences in terms of emotions, right? I'm sure you have seen it. Many videos where, for example, a goat or a pig or a cow was separated from its children and it literally cried for days. They experience grief when their children are gone and separated from them from birth. They experience pain whenever they are shed from their skin because it's used for animal products, which means they have emotions and preferences. But secondly, they also have agency. They also have preferences. They will have, literally, they have preferences. They would prefer not to be in captivity. If you give an animal a choice to live in the forest or in a cage, it would not likely choose the cage, which means it's capable of making a choice, right? They have choices because whenever they express pain, it signals that they care about their children and they don't want them to be separated, which means means they also have dignified expressions of agency or autonomy, much like humans. The final thing I would like to say is I'm going to go creatively on the offensive. Animals are not only equal to humans, their pain is significantly greater than that of humans. Multiple reasons as to why this is the case. The first one is if animals lack consciousness, they have no ability to justify the suffering they are going through. That is to say, they cannot cope, they cannot construe meaning, they cannot construe purpose. Their suffering is senseless and they cannot make sense of it. Secondly, animals cannot communicate verbally, which means it's significantly harder to reassure themselves that everything is going to be okay. The mechanisms through which we as humans cope are significantly worse. Thirdly, pain is significantly worse if you do not understand why the pain is happening. Imagine a person who has cancer does not understand why they got cancer in spite of living a good life. They feel like life does not make sense. It's a constant spiral of suffering. It's the same thing that a cow experiences when she is separated from her children. She does not understand why the children are missing, nor do the humans are able to communicate and tell the cow that the children are missing. Meaning the regular emotionally regulatory coping mechanisms that humans have do not exist for animals. The emotional, mental, and physical pain that they experience is significantly greater than that of humans. Before I continue, closing.
Yeah, so you think animals are more important than humans. If I had a tiger who was starving and was like really suffering because they were starving, would you feed a human to that tiger?
I don't care for whimsy hypotheticals. This would never happen in the real life. This is a fake morality. The only thing I care about is what happens in the real world. In the real world, animals are suffering. I don't care about this. The final two things I would like to say. Firstly, you as a panel do not need to be definitively convinced that animals are equal moral actors. The very danger that they are equal to us in moral, in moral equalness is something that we should care about, right? If there is a building or a hospital that could hypothetically have people, we intuitively should not be bombing the hospital because the very risk of hurting another life that is equal to ours is something that matters. The final thing I would say is consciousness is not a criteria through which we should evaluate moral rights. This is why people that have less intelligence than us are still have the same rights. They cannot vote less than us. For example, people in coma have equal rights. Babies have equal rights. People that are, you know them in the real life, that have no self-awareness, you feel like they have no consciousness, they have equal rights to us. We treat them equally. Every single living being, as long as it experiences pain, as long as it experiences emotion, as long as it gets preferences, wants one thing over the other, as long as they're capable of making social relationships, should have a life of their own. If that is impossible, we should relieve them of the suffering. On all those grounds, propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Now to open the case inside opposition, I call on the leader of opposition, the leader here.
Sorry. I am difficult technology. I'll start with my next word, POIs in the chat. I'll take you when I take you. I am genuinely disgusted by the liberal hypocrisy. Children are starving in Gaza, in Sudan, in Yemen, in Myanmar. We are talking about millions of children. They're refusing them the food that they can get. This is what propositions stand for. And this is not conceptually whether they can conceptualize pain. Those are human beings that understand their suffering, that see the war that is going on around them, and you are refusing them. You are refusing them to have a bite. This is something that proposition needs to stand for. And honestly, I am putting the big one on the table. Multiple reasons as to why animals do not have a moral standing. They do not have a soul, and I don't care. I will kill all of them if I have to. Firstly, they don't have the capacity for abstract thought. They cannot speak. They cannot communicate in a manner that is understandable. Secondly, they cannot think. Even in the most advanced experiments that we have had with monkeys, it is a repetition of events that they are making afterwards. It is not a thought that they're formulating. Thirdly, they have no sense of self. Most animals, all animals actually, do not recognize themselves in the mirror. Even the animals that we eat especially cannot see the image of themselves within the mirror. What does that mean? They cannot conceptualize themselves. They cannot conceptualize the pain that they're experiencing. And note that abstract thought matters because it is the meaning of life. Pain and death is not something that is good or bad. It is actually zero-sum. It is net neutral within morality. The only thing that assigns pain something, that assigns death something, is the abstract thought of morality. Thinking about whether pain is something good or something bad. Animals cannot do this. Animals do not have the capacity to have this abstract thought, to assign moral value to it. That is why suffering within animals, it's nothing more than just something happening within the universe. Rather, suffering within humans is something that we can quantify as necessarily bad. And the reason for this is not, it is the animal kingdom. It is natural for prey to die. They're engineered in a way where the weak die. Note, abstract thought also gives you the ability to live for something outside of pleasure and pain. It gives you the ability to assign meaning to your life. The cow is bad on net neutral or good on net neutral. On what grounds? Given that how much their life would have benefited if they did not exist in the first place, it is probably not something that we can say. E.g., if they didn't exist, we wouldn't care. They also wouldn't care. But humans do care. Your life, your existence means something because of the abstract thought of you being able to conceptualize yourself and everything around you. But also, secondly, animals are literal psychopaths. They have no empathy or sympathy. And this is something core to having a soul. Why? I want to just note what is the first time that we as humanity notice inhumanity consciousness. It is when they found a femur bone healed. This means that when somebody broke their leg, they carried him, they cared for him, so he can have a healed leg and he can walk with them. This is the first time that we notice consciousness within society. We have not seen any of this within animals. Why is this the case? Firstly, they don't care about each other. It is instinct. It is hormones overwhelming, meaning their desire for food, for replication, for killing is the one that's primary. That is why, even if you think your dog is cute and it loves you and it has affection towards you, if you starve it, watch it kill you, literally bite off you. But also, secondly, it is evolutionary. They need to die. They have to kill. They have to suffer. And evolutionary, this makes them not care for each other, because if they do, it makes no meaning. But that's where humans are different. We care for each other. We have overcome this evolutionary thing. That is why we assign to humans soul, and we don't do it for animals. So, what does this mean that we can kill animals? Because A, we do bad things to bad people. If they're psychopaths that are willing to kill us, we should kill them. That's why we have the death penalty. But also, secondly, no empathy means that you have no soul. Soul is about caring. Soul is about giving and loving. If they do not have a soul, they do not have any moral standing. Now, why do we then want to eat animals? A, this creates a massive economic crisis where billions of people lose their job. The agricultural sector is the biggest sector. And this is simply because it is the biggest necessity for people to eat. They cannot eat, they cannot live, right? This is why it's a massive sector where a lot of money flows in. And there's so many things that is not just about meat. It is about dairy. It's about products that are tied to them, such as pesticides and all of those things. It is also about the trucking jobs from and to the specific facilities where the animals are held. And note, all of this renders useless in a matter of months. We are talking about $1 trillion industry shackling to its feet millions of people immediately unemployed. Those are the poorest people that are low-skilled workers that are consolidated in parts of a country or in whole developing countries. Those people now do not have a job. They do not have an alternative. How will Proposition just go there and build another farm that is based on agriculture? This does not happen in this way. Those facilities are specifically made for animals. Before I continue, I'll take closing.
Lots of vulnerable human populations don't have the cognitive criteria you described.
It is about whether we as human species, it is whether about we as human species have the ability to have a conscious thought. Maybe some of us do not because of some disabilities that exist, but it is about the species in general. Other species besides human do not have this as a characteristic assigned to them. Second big impact, besides people are starving, people are unemployed, people are going to die of fucking hunger on their side of the house. It also limits choices on food, and it makes it much worse for the people that are already experiencing hunger. Note that the farming industry that is only about agriculture is much less stable because bugs coming literally renders all of your yield useless. The soil is finite. You can literally take all of the nutrients out of the soil, which makes it much harder for you to have produce. Thirdly, it is susceptible to to drought, which is much more common in climate change. That is why 3/3 of the Syrian yield for this year is gone. People are going to starve to death on this side of the house. But thirdly, like religious opt-in, the Bible tells you that animals have no soul. The Bible also tells you that you need to sacrifice specific animals in a specific time of year. It also tells you that you need to eat animals in specific times of year. For those people, religious people, it is life or death, whether they're following the Bible to the word. Those are people that actually believe in this. And you are also, as a panel, who are you to say that God doesn't exist in the way that Christianity believes it to exist? And I just want to point out, those people now have to go to hell because somebody decided to spread a fucking virus. This is disgusting for all of those reasons. Opening opposition.
I think leader of opposition for that speech. Now to continue the case of government, I call on the Deputy Prime Minister, Gelatin. Here.
Dylan, we can't hear you if you're talking.
You're not audible.
Not audible.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Cool.
The meat industry tried to sabotage your speech. Don't worry.
Truthfully, I'm not afraid that future generations will look back at how we treat animals and judge us. I'm worried that they won't. I have a lot of respect for Velina as a speaker and the conviction she demonstrated in that speech. And so that should be kept in mind as I now demonstrate why I believe that she is so wrong. First thing they say is, guys, we all know there's humans out there and they have humanity. Circular argument explains just why is humanity the important quality here. Second, they say it demonstrates the demonstration of the ability for abstract thought is the basis of morality. These are already explained to you that we give these attributions to humans even when they cannot demonstrate this abstract thought. We give the attribution of morality. The response to the POI from CG, which re-illustrates this point, is to say it is about the potential capacity for abstract thought in humans writ large. I have no idea why we should derive a specific action from a categorical quality as opposed to looking at the specific context of that action. For example, that's why I believe, and it's generally intuitive, that whereas stealing might be bad in general, if you're stealing to feed your family, it's oftentimes quite good or pretty reasonable if you're stealing bread, by the way. So that's the reason why that analysis does not work. But of course, animals do demonstrate abstract thought. The experience of loss, grief, elephants host funerals from one another, development of personalities and friendships, etc. Even if it doesn't mirror the exact human abstract thought, does not mean it does not exist. Thirdly, they say it is the meaning of life and pain is zero sum. That is a non-sentence. I don't know why pain would be zero sum here. Fourthly, it's natural for animals to die. There's a plurality of things which are natural, which we believe are good, and which we believe are bad. The moral quality lies not in their naturality, but their specific instances, which is why, for example, although it might be natural for humans to kill one another, we've decided that it is a bad thing to do. Fifthly, they repeat that assignment of morality requires abstract thought because it means that's how you derive morality. There's a confusion here. There's abstract thought might be required to figure out whether things are right or wrong, but it's not required to figure out whether someone should be deserving of consideration over right and wrong. So they're using that word in two different ways in those two sentences. Seventhly, evolution forces animals not to care about one another. Of course, evolution does force animals to care about one another by sharing of resources and communities, etc. is exactly the kind of way in which animals would evolve. And descriptively and obviously, animals demonstrate care for one another. Animals that are formed as pets form friendships with one another. CF Biser's analysis as well on this as well. So the final attribution they have there, though, is there was a massive crisis that would happen as a result of this action. They concede and they agree that this would indeed result in the no longer consumption of those animals existing. So that's an agreed upon claim in the top half of the debate. What I would note, however, that doesn't deal with the moral question of the debate, because if they believe that empathy is the basis upon morality, I would ask them to answer why it is that we should not therefore continue to eat animals, but just feel the pain that they experience when we do so, put ourselves in the position of their shoes, understand their suffering as we do so. Of course, both teams agree that this will eradicate consumption of animal products, but ethically they haven't provided the justification for that. They've only provided justification as to why we should feel those things. There's a significant barrier to opening government there. Why do we win the debate? Basic weighing, I think, is a pretty good way to start. Scale, there are far more animals and factory farmed animals existing outside of the existences of humans. And also they are created at a higher rate. They die and are reborn at a higher rate. So there's more of them existing over time. Secondly, intensity of impact that happens here. Many humans on Earth are obligate vegetarians. They rely on non-meat sources for produce, and the reason for that is that meat is exceptionally expensive because it's extremely expensive to feed an animal and house it over the course of their life and then sell it on, which is, by the way, also the reason why animals are generally exceptionally mistreated. The intensity for animals is pure torture over the course of their lives. Thirdly, of course, is vulnerability. Animals lack any degree of alternative available for them to reach their own freedom. They cannot organize, cannot mobilize, etc. CO give a POI, which says, would you feed the tiger? Of course, there's a flagrant disregard for the morality of that animal. A tiger, presumably starving as a result of human action, presumably taken into captivity, presumably taken away from its loved ones, from its home. I do think that there is a reasonable suggestion, if there's no alternatives available, that we should feed a human to that animal. Of course, that's not a likely situation to ever happen, which is why it's the level of abstraction here doesn't actually help with closing opposition. So, why is violation of the consent of humans legitimate here, which I think is a reasonable question from opening opposition? Consent is not the same as, it's not the sole arbiter of the moral status of an action. We consider it as a comparison, as a part of a comparison, but we often exclude it in specific instances, such as, 1, consent relies on the mutual comprehension of the proposition at hand. If I consent to a birthday cake that actually has poison in it, and I was unaware of the poison being in it, that would be an epistemic alienation which violated or nullifies the relevance of consent in that instance. Of course, humans are alienated from the fact of killing, the fact of deprivation, the fact of the harm done to animals, because we create a simulacra of animal products. By the time they get to the consumer, they're generally so far from being observably animals that it does not trigger our conscious thought. Secondly, consent does not consider positionality. So, for example, if I put a gun to your head and say, your money or your life, that is a choice. It's not a meaningful choice because you had no say over which actor you were in that situation, whether you were or were not the person with the gun. And so we say analogously, it is the case that if animals were in the positions of humans and would make the same decision, or rather would make the same decision about them, right? That's the only way you could get towards an avenue of consent here. But we know, as Biser has demonstrated, that those animals do not want that action to be taken against them. They do not want that force to be subjected upon them. So no meaningful consideration of consent here. Fourthly, consent is ceded in instances of particularly reprehensible moral action because you've demonstrated a disregard for that moral quality, which is why, for example, it's okay to leave your spouse if they're abusive, even if that would negate the quality of their life moving forward. Lastly, consent does not recognize higher order preferences. Most humans, as opening opposition themselves note, want to live the good life, but they have no understanding of what that good life is. They're alienated from it. We say they are more likely to take actions which are ethical and good on our side of the house, and so humans' higher order preferences are in line with it. CO.
Yeah, so all this consent stuff sounds good, but aren't you doing the exact same harm to animals as you do to humans when you literally have their governments infect them and change their immune systems permanently?
We are not, and that's because of the previous 14 minutes or maybe 12 minutes or so of analysis from our team. Why is mass culling preferable? So if you just kill off all these animals, which is probably what's realistically going to happen, why is that preferable to the status quo continuing? Firstly, the harm, death to these animals would have happened on either side. They get killed on either side of the house, and they just get recreated afterwards. Secondly, some actions are so reprehensible that we would not will an actor into existence in order to just experience it, which is what you have when you continue factory farming. So, for example, we're like natalism neutral on our side of the house, but you wouldn't say it's legitimate for someone to give birth to a child in order to torture it for the duration of their life, even though that child would not have existed on the other side of that decision. Thirdly, even in non-utilitarian systems, you can consider the mean cachet of cognitive experiences and whether there is a describable and observable repugnance to it, and desire that repugnance would not exist. And finally, population ethics is an open-ended question which requires a lot of discussion of uniquely realizable actors. We've provided ways in which you determine it there, and that's the worst-case scenario for our side of the house. Eat some vegetables for dinner tomorrow night. Very proud to propose.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. Now, to close the debate in the opening half, I call Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Alek, here.
I love Velina, and probably only Velina, in ways that I don't think any animal can ever love anyone. I don't think that animal can ever conceptualize a love for a person greater than that feeling within the back of their brain that tell them eat and kill and go out and do this and do that. Maybe this is a hot take, maybe this makes me a bad guy, but I love people and I think animals are pretty nice. I don't think they have souls. I would never feel bad for eating a steak, and I don't think one should ever in this particular sense. Firstly, let's be very clear on what the debate is, so back half doesn't engage in any kind of way. If animals have any moral value, or if animals have any kind of relevant moral value, opening government win because they prevent 10,000 holocausts. Cool. All right, like you don't eat shrimp, you don't eat caviar, many people die in this particular case. If animals have no moral value, we win because we prevent clear harms upon people. Even if these harms are less than the harms on animals, it doesn't matter because animals don't have moral value. From there, like, oh, consent on humans, whoa, which CEO might run. Bro, they prevent 10,000 holocausts. It doesn't matter if we prevent like, you can't be doing this in these kinds of debates and expect to win in this particular case. But second thing I want to engage in before I get to the meat and potatoes, they say some people also do not have the kind of qualities we talk about, ergo, it's not moral in this particular case to do this. The first thing I want to say is I think virtually every single human who matters has these qualities more than animals. Like even people with severe learning disabilities can actually learn how to speak language, can learn how to express themselves, their thoughts in this particular case, can learn to want something that isn't what they immediately feel in this particular case, in this capacity. If we're talking about people who are legitimately vegetables, who never wake up 100%, dude, if it harms people massively for them to be alive, pull the plug. I don't care. I don't understand to what degree why this is something we ought to care about. This is essentially what animals are. But secondly, of course it's categorical or whatever, or not categorical. I don't understand this EPL stuff. Because we as humans decide that killing humans is bad. We have the capacity to make this decision because we are moral actors that have the capacity to understand what a fucking good decision is and what a good decision isn't in this particular case. Animals have no ability to understand what a good decision is and what a good decision isn't. So killing any human is a bad thing insofar as we've decided this. Now, they say animals are in some way similar to humans. This is trivially true. Like, I'm not going to respond that animals have empathy. This is true. Animals are also meaningfully different to humans. They cannot express themselves. They cannot conceptualize more complex ideas. They cannot conceptualize a number of these other things. This is also trivially true. It's essentially impossible to respond to. This is why animals haven't gotten up and spoken to us. Now, here is high-level debating. 7 reasons why the ways in which they are different mean they have no moral value. This is how we do it up in here. The first is, why is pain even good or bad? Like, they say pain is really bad. It's very terrible to experience it. But like, why? Why is anything good or bad? Why is anything a moral or immoral value? Why is it bad to experience? Like, I could say it's pretty good to experience pain. And this is the intuition. We as humans do things which hurt us all the time. We go to debating in this particular sense and it fucking sucks and I have to stay up until super late, but I do it for some grander purpose than myself in this particular case. I assign an additional value to pain or pleasure. Note something very important. Pain is not by itself good or bad, and we as humans do not by itself consider it good or bad. It is only good or bad insofar as it is pain that violates some more abstract conceptions of morality. It's pain insofar as it violates these kind of things. Animals have no abstract conceptions of morality. They have no capacity to conceptualize this pain. To them, this pain is meaningless. It can be good or bad the same way pain could be good or bad to anything in this particular case, and they have no ability to differentiate it. Secondly, however, and this is very important, pain is completely fucking immeasurable. How do you know? Because like, oh, they say, oh, it's so terrible because animals experience a great deal of pain. But like, if these animals are in the wild, they would also experience a great deal of pain. They would also be harmed in a variety of horrible ways, or they would experience really terrible things. Or even if we talk about animals which are born just to be killed, is it better to be born just to be killed than to not be born at all? Who knows, right? Who knows if the beauty of seeing the world outweighs these? No, but legitimately, you don't understand these kinds of things. These are things you cannot measure. You don't have a utility measurement machine in this particular sense that allows you to actually make this determination. Perhaps the greatness of life outweighs it in this particular capacity. But here's the very important thing, is we have the ability to make moral adjudications on things beyond the amount of pain. Animals do not have this ability. Animals do not get the privilege of us saying we should save their lives or not, we should give them pain or not, we should give them birth or not, and they have no guarantee that animals' lives are comparatively better insofar as their only mechanism, which is utility and disutility, is an immeasurable one in this particular capacity. Before I continue, I'll take closing quickly.
If you cannot measure pain and pleasure, then how is human love deep deeper than
What? Dude, I'm a deontologist. I don't believe in utility at all in this particular case. I think it's deep because you construct people, you like assign yourself to other people in a way beyond pain and pleasure. And I think it's something animals cannot do. But thirdly, this is very important, is they say animals have personalities. Animals are different in this particular capacity. Yeah, bro. But animals are not distinct in the same way that humans are distinct. One of the very important things is that humans humans' personality is entirely different, and we know this by their ability to express themselves. Animals have none of that ability. But fourthly, and this is the one they don't respond to at all, animals are fucking horrible. They are evil. They give zero responses to this. Animals would kill you any day of the week, bro. And animals would kill you in ways we wouldn't in this particular case, because we're able to transcend these feelings of wanting to eat, of wanting to feed in this particular capacity. That's why when we're hungry, we don't slaughter someone on the fucking street when it's convenient for us to have a meal in this particular capacity. Why does it matter that you are moral in this case? Why does it matter to assigning moral values? Because the moment you are immoral, the moment you are beyond this particular thing, you opt out of the systems we have built. Even if you buy that these are systems that also ought apply to them, these are not systems that animals continuously engage in this particular capacity, or this system that people engage in. And here's where they say, oh, but you know, this is why people should eat animals to experience their pain, and this is what empathy is. Empathy is the ability to experience pain without experiencing it, to see other people suffering and for you to feel it, something animals don't have. That's why they don't care for each other. That's why they don't care, and we should never over-prioritize their lives over the lives of real fucking humans. Vote us.
I think Deputy Leader of the Opposition for that speech. Now to open the debate in the closing house, I call the Member of Government, Robi, here.
Before my speech, I would like to say two things. Firstly, a disclaimer for the people watching this recording. We don't get to choose which side we are on. In real life, I don't agree with this motion. I love meat maxing, but you know, it's fun to defend things you disagree with. Second, in my time zone, it's the 21st, which is Arjun's birthday. So happy birthday, Arjun. I can't believe the warrior prince from the Gita invited me to do a comp with him. It's been a pleasure. Anyway, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. In closing, government will prove why utilitarianism is the correct moral intuition and why speciesism, that O goes for, isn't the correct moral intuition. First piece of framing. Where does morality come from? We posit that all morality comes from intuitions. Why is this the case? Because all the alternatives are insufficient. Religions and laws are circular and assertive. You say that something is good because the law says it or the Bible says it. Velina just asserts that God exists and says it's xenophobic if we disagree with Christianity. Well, you know, people have different religions and people have different conceptions of God. It's all circular. That coincidentally also defeats Alek's deontology because I am unsure why Alek's rules are more important than any other rules. Secondly, any sort of evolutionary explanations for what humans are likely to behave are descriptive but not prescriptive. Maybe we evolved to like this, maybe we evolved to consciously talk to each other. That just describes things. It doesn't argue for why something is good or bad. However, intuitions are something upon which most people base their moral laws on. And Alek is right here to say that just because most people feel that utility is good doesn't mean that they make the logical step of actually believing that utility is good. Or rather, just because utility feels good to most people doesn't mean that what feels good ought to be good or we ought to prioritize it. So now we will explain why this is the core intuition that most people have and why we should default to this core intuition. But before I go into that, just because people have different end intuitions, like always right, most people have the end intuition that humans are more important than animals, doesn't mean that the average intelligent voter would be persuaded by this, because what we do in a debate is we take the core baseline moral intuitions and then persuade the average intelligent voter that if you accept those core base moral intuitions, they should agree with a certain point of view. We will prove utilitarianism is a base moral intuition that most humans have. Why is utilitarianism then, or why do are intuitions something that we should base things on? Note that since we cannot adjudicate the value of any intuition more than another, or any assertive law than another, the best we can do is to have a Bayesian model of what's the most likely intuition to be true. Insofar as all humans, as intersubjective actors, have their own moral intuitions, like Alek's deontology or Velina's Christianity, the only way by which you can adjudicate which of these intuitions is right is by assigning an equal value to each of them and then seeing what is the most aggregate intuition that most people have. So that's the only way by which you can compare the value of different moral intuitions. Why is utilitarianism something that most people agree with? Because there is intersubjective agreement, because pain and pleasure is so proximate to everyone, which means by which you can derive that these are the things that are the most core and more good to anyone. Also, it's the thing that's the most measurable. You can measure things like duration, scale, and reversibility, and you can sidestep subjective preferences that talks about like if you're conscious, you have a soul and things like that. But I will posit that even utilitarianism in itself is not sufficient, because people have a core intuition of ontological good and ontological evil. People believe that evil actors should be punished and good actors should not be punished. Why? Because even though most people have core utilitarian intuitions, they wouldn't allow for situations in which unjust people get more pleasure than others. For example, if one person defended themselves in self-defense against 5 actors who were morally evil, people would be willing to sidestep the core utilitarian intuition that, it's worse for the 5 people to be worse off, because you are justified in defending yourself against oppression. So, for example, you can also take the analogy of the utility monster, in the sense that if a magician were to conjure up a monster that wanted to do evil to other people, that had no empathy and kill people without remorse, that experienced infinite utility, it would be bad. Why then are humans ontologically evil compared to animals? But before I move on to that, I'll take a POI from OO.
Animals are way more evil than you because you have the capacity to feel morality, and if you don't, we punish you. They have no capacity to feel morality, any of them.
Yes, let me jump straight into this. So humans, precisely because they have the capacity to premeditate what they are doing, are complicit in all of the bad things that's going on in the world, and because of their complicity, they are less valuable. Notice that even in court, we use things like whether you are aware if you are doing something bad as a prerequisite for determining if you are actually should be put in prison or not. So if you were drunk and you weren't aware that you killed someone, you get a manslaughter charge, you don't get the first-degree homicide charge. Or if you're mentally ill, you also get exempt. So given that humans have this ability for premeditation, most humans are aware that animals suffer. Vegan activism is everywhere around you, yet humans choose to ignore it. They are uniquely morally complicit in the suffering. Whereas animals, even though they might eat people, as O says, are not evil because they don't have the capacity to premeditate. So OG does say that since animals don't have the capacity to have agency, this is a violation of their agency. Our claim isn't that this is a violation of the agency of the animals, but rather that animals aren't morally culpable in the evil that they're doing, since they can't do anything else. So given that humans are morally culpable in the evil that they are doing, they are more worthy of punishment. What does this mean? Most people in the developed world definitely can survive with alternatives that don't involve the continual torture of animals, but even people in developing countries have at least some degree of agency. Animals have none. What has the analysis so far in closing government proven? First, that most people have really strong utilitarian intuitions as their core intuition, given that a lot more animals suffer, as OO has conceded, compared to humans. Like on scale, yes, OG wins, but OO has conceded this isn't that contestable. Given this fact, we should lean towards the utilitarian calculus. But even if some humans have intuitions that are contrary to utilitarianism, such as the idea of moral desert, if you are culpable or not, humans are uniquely more culpable for the evils they do. Look at how apathetic humans are about the suffering that's going on in Gaza by Zionists and stuff like that. So if you had the ability to save a child that's drowning, but you don't, you are evil. Why does this win this debate? And they want to respond to the Alek scam. Oh, if CG OG proves that animals matter, then OG wins automatically because OG proves animal genocide. This isn't how normative debates work, right? Because obviously, first, it's not that contestable within this debate that there's a trade-off between animal lives and human lives. At best, OG scales this, but in most good rooms, op will prove, Gov will prove that animals suffer more. The core contestable burden is whether speciesism in itself is a justifiable trade-off, whether the pleasure that humans gain from it is uniquely good or bad. Insofar as we have proven that the core intuitions that any moral actors could have are such that they would be predisposed towards utilitarianism and towards respecting human lives, we have proven to you in this debate that you shouldn't go for the arbitrary things that O says, such as people have a soul or people are conscious. These are circular, arbitrary criteria. CG wins.
I thank member of government for that speech. Now to open the case of closing opposition, I call member of opposition, Gareth. Here.
In the arc of biological history, the greatest enemy of any living organism has been disease. And we used to believe that spirits cause illnesses. At the turn of the Enlightenment, we began to realize that it wasn't spirits or bad air, but viruses. And we did create things to save this, vaccines and science. By making people allergic to vaccines that require animals, and by inoculating people against science, the other teams into this debate ironically kill humanity in the toxic air of their own self-righteousness. CO are going to prove two impacts. First, now that governments have permanently changed their immune system, people are going to be unable to consume vaccines, which causes a massive loss of life. And second, people are going to be really, really angry. They're going to protest, cause instability, distrust hospitals and states, and this leads to chaos and the loss of life. First, on vaccines. I first want to give, ironically, a science structural reason as to why vaccines have to use animal products. And the reason why is because of how vaccines work in general. They work because they are essentially dead or weakened viruses that enter the body and in many cases imitate these viruses or bacteria that we're trying to inoculate ourselves against. But these viruses cannot be held in anything synthetic because your own immune system will begin to reject it. And this means that the vaccine itself will get rejected by your body. Plants don't work either because your DNA is just far too different from plants for you to be able to accept it. And as a result then, given that it is often packaged in animal products, it requires the animal product to be encased in it to enter your body in the first place. And if you don't believe me, this is why in many Muslim countries there are fatwas that allow special dispensation of Muslims to consume gelatin through vaccines, because these are an important part of vaccines. As a side note also, like fish collagen is important for burn victims, as well as a host of other importance. The important thing that we need to weigh here precisely is why the scale of impact is relatively large. And the reason for this is because vaccines are mainly given to children, people who are not going to be able to consent in either way, people who are going to feel massive pain, and you know what, have not done any of the harms that the government bench want to talk about against humans. But also, if government is going to mitigate me by saying, okay, but people know that vaccines are bad, they're probably just going to take them and endure the massive suffering that the Infoslide says that they're going to have, I want you to know that herd immunity is important, right? In order for vaccines to work as a whole, you don't just need most people to take it. You need up to like 80 to 90% of the population to take it, because there are lots of people whose bodies still reject vaccines, or people who can't take vaccines because they're immunocompromised. And if significantly less, even like 10%, 20% less people begin taking vaccines as a result of this, this means that the most vulnerable individuals in the world are likely to get killed as a result. And I want to know, we thought we eliminated measles, but these things keep coming back. Think about the fact that polio is coming back in Michigan because people don't take these vaccines, and particular diseases that kill humans when they are young. Think about the fact that COVID essentially annihilated the entirety of a human population, and the reason for this is because we have new and increasing viruses and bacteria that are constantly evolving to be increasingly infectious. And Gov might say, Gareth, but we can just pump a lot of money into this and create vaccines that do not require animal products. I call horseshit on this. And the reason for this is because it's just like incredibly speculative on their side, whether or not they're going to be able to resynthesize something as fundamental as the human biology and the fact that we have an immune system. I have given you real reasons throwing money at the problem don't change this. But also, I want to explain why this harm is so much larger than anything that anyone else is talking about in this debate. The first thing that I want to note is that unlike the animals that open government themselves say are going to get culled, the human race has this like sticky habit of surviving, even through measles, which means that the infinite time that we might exist until an asteroid kills us all, the human race goes limping on with measles, with polio, with malaria, and all of these terrible things. So the scale of impact is significantly larger. But the second thing I want to note is that ironically, animals also can't get vaccinated as well as a result of this debate. So animals also get harmed in many cases as well. I want to weigh this. One, O's argument is essentially, human beings are great and economic necessity is important. And they say refugees as well. I want to know that the world's poorest humans don't tend to eat meat. And the reason for this is meat is fucking expensive. So I'm not really sure where this weighing scale happens. But also I don't know, whether you believe in deontology or whether you believe in utilitarianism, surely you have an incentive and a responsibility to help your children. And if not, children suffering is bad. So I think we win all this. Okay, second argument, people are going to be very angry. And I'm just going to step back. And I just want all of you to ask yourself what this actually entails, like what precisely this motion entails. This entails the vast majority of people being secretly drugged by their governments, by their scientists. And they're gonna fucking find out. Because guys, obviously I'm allergic to meat now. What does this actually mean? This means, one, most people are going to be incredibly angry because this represents a fundamental invasion of their bodies, and in many cases they're going to be quite mad, but also because they feel betrayed. But hold on, I'm not running a principal argument about the importance of bodily autonomy. I am running an argument that people are no longer going to trust their governments, their doctors, and science as well. And the reason for this is because, one, we think that the scientists that are likely to carry this out are going to get caught. A, because there's probably going to be massive public push for accountability when everyone realizes that they are sick for a fucking reason. But also, even if we don't catch the perpetrators, it's very clear that something sneaky and biological has happened to them. They are far more likely to blame in a world of conspiracy theorists. Actually, you know what? Yeah, opening, go on.
An allergic reaction at most lasts for a couple of weeks. The suffering of animals lasts for the whole lifetime. The scale argument is also non-comparative. Many future generations of animals are also going to suffer.
But I'm just explaining to you why people won't take the vaccine. I'm not talking about pain here. Like what? Okay, anyway. The bigger problem then is, what does this mean? Given that we live in a world of massive inequality, massive resentment, where people don't trust their institutions, I would submit that this is probably going to be a use for large political and conspiracy theorists and nationalists to rile up anger at the population, cause people to doubt people like the scientific establishment and their own doctors. What are the impacts of this? There are three. One, people don't trust their governments. This means when COVID-25 happens, everyone is fucked, because no one is actually entering and not hibernating, but isolating. But it also just means people don't buy into the state, which is in itself bad. Two, people don't see their doctors. And this also just causes more death in general, because people, don't trust the fact that their doctors have their best interests at heart. Three, riots. I'm quite sure this is going to happen. I'm genuinely sure that this is going to happen. And when the economic unrest that occurs is going to be much larger than anything else in this debate. For all of these reasons, I'm proud to win the Princeton Ivy again.
I thank member of opposition for that fine speech. Now to close the debate inside government, I call on the government whip. Arjun, here, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Nice, happy 21st for me. Before I begin, I have a few thank yous. The first is obviously to my excellent partner, Robi. It's been an exceptional experience debating with you, a lot of fun, and thank you for the happy birthday. The second is to all of the friends who have been cheering me on. I'm very grateful for that, and to my parents, who will probably watch this speech at some point for their support. I'll take POIs non-verbally since I cannot, my audio is a little bit scuffed. I'm speaking from rather far away. And for those of you who are comfortable doing so, I'd love it if you could turn your cameras on. I find it makes the debate a lot more engaging and a lot more fun. Cool. A very simple structure to this speech. I will first explain why long diagonal is out of contention, and then I'm going to spend 6 minutes of direct refutation and weighing over opening opposition. The first thing I want to note is the closing opposition's extension is batshit crazy. So their extension is we're going to create vaccines, and these we cannot use vaccines that come and originate from animals because human beings, and this is their mechanism by the way, will feel intense discomfort. Check the info slide. This doesn't make animal products and animal things lethal to human beings. So if these diseases are so bad, we can still take the vaccines. This extension is uncomparative. The large problem with opening government is that top half have an unresolved clash over the moral frame we should use to evaluate the round. Opening opposition is correct that human beings will die as a result of this, and opening government does not prove why it is necessarily bad to experience pain or why utilitarianism is the moral intuition that we should have relative to the opening opposition frame on why human values and human morality matter comparatively more than utilitarianism. Insofar as Robi explains two things. First, why if moral intuitions cannot be adjudicated between, you should default to the most shared intuition, why that most shared intuition is utilitarianism, and why that argumentation is missing in opening government were already logically prior to opening government. Let's move on into opening opposition. I first want to flip OO on utility and on human benefits. We believe and we agree that human beings are moral agents. I'm just going to explain that human beings live lives that are overwhelmingly disutile, and per the opening opposition concession that because we die anyways, death is a net neutral thing. If I prove that the experiences we have in life are on balance more painful than pleasurable, that flips the opening opposition claim that we should care about human beings from the mass famine impacting, given the earlier frame of Robi that has already explained why utilitarianism is the moral intuition that we should have, that I think is broadly accepted in the debate by this point. There are 4 reasons then why the lives of human beings tend to be incredibly disutile. The first reason, as OO themselves flags, is that human beings suffer twice when they suffer pain. They first suffer when they experience the pain, and then when they suffer when they think about the pain, when they have night tremors and trauma about the pain. And the very higher level of cognition that opening opposition notes is precisely why we experience pain going forward. The pain of not just having a breakup with a partner that we loved, but that breakup lasting several months and the process of healing and recovering from that being incredibly traumatic and painful. Or the fact that human beings experience childhood trauma, and that trauma often lasts with them for the rest of their lives. Secondarily, because the vast majority of the world lives under structures of capital that incentivize capital to go to the wealthy, to the rich, and to the powerful, those at the bottom are left with nothing necessary to satisfy their base physiological needs, and because human beings have an instinctive and biological drive for self-actualization, often face an incredible amount and degree of pain. Secondarily, the vast majority of the preference sets of human beings are not satisfiable all at once. So human beings want to have nice careers, they want to have nice and loving relationships, they want to have a good reputation, they want to be moral agents and moral actors. The problem is, oftentimes these preferences contrast with each other, and even if you feel satisfied in some areas of your life, you usually don't feel satisfied in all areas of your life. And because human beings have a drive to achieve the best possible versions of themselves, to become the best possible versions of themselves, because there are constant narratives in the media that propagate this, the vast majority of human experience is feeling unfulfilled. Third, human beings feel the hedonic treadmill far more intensely than animals do. And that is because, as opening opposition concedes, animals live in the moment. They aren't constantly thinking about the future. Whereas human beings usually experience suffering to a far more intense degree than they benefit from pleasure, because human beings become accustomed to the pleasure on which they face, because they have a strong memory of the pleasure that they've experienced in the past. And the reason why we feel pain more intensely than pleasure, as opening opposition themselves say, is because we have a strong biological incentive to want to avoid pain, and therefore we internally experience pain at far more intense rates. Critically, insofar as either animals or humans are going to experience some level of disutility, the explanation here explains why human beings experience far more disutility than animals do. Before I go on, I'll take opening opposition.
Yes, you make them experience more disutility, and unlike animals, their disutility matters as per all of our reasons. This doesn't respond to us at all.
You don't make them experience more disutility, because as per your concession, death is something that happens relatively quickly. If you have mass famine, people will only last several months or up to a year or so. Insofar as that is true, human beings who likely suffer as a result of this die incredibly quickly, and thus they experience less disutility on scale as opposed to more disutility, because if the vast majority of your experiences are bad, then this is something that you face. The second extension that Robi proves is why human beings are evil and why animals are more important. And I want to independently weigh this extension also over opening opposition, because the core premise of opening opposition is we should care about human beings because they are moral agents that have moral value and moral worth. But opening opposition never actually gives you comprehensive mechanization or reasoning as to why human beings are the moral agents that we should prioritize. And here are the reasons that they give you. They say, first, it's unclear why pain is good or bad. We give you the explanation on utilitarianism in Robi. They say, second, that animals are evil. This is the preemption that they have towards their case. But the reasoning they give for this is nonsensical. They say human beings have overcome selfishness. Really? When we are starving, when we are tired, we give in to our base moral intuitions. So there's no moral distinction here. Human beings stranded on islands where there is no food do default to cannibalism. There were entire tribes of people who have practiced cannibalism for thousands of years. So if opening opposition's preemption is, your pet would eat you, I would posit that human beings would also eat each other in times of desperation and have been shown to be incredibly cruel, to fight over resources, to scrap over the ability to have all of these particular things. Critically, what Robi's extension explains is why animals are less ontologically evil than humans. And so even if we accept the premise that animals might be, to some extent, have some degree of evil within them, we explain why human beings are more ontologically evil, and thus we ought to prioritize animal life over prioritizing human life, which independently wins the round. Because regardless of whether opening opposition or opening government wins the clash on utilitarianism, because we explain why animals are ontologically evil, if you buy the ontological frame of opening opposition, we win and beat them on this particular clash. Let's move on to the last portion of opening opposition, which is their reasons as to why animals do not have a soul, which is uncomparative to human beings. Their mechanism here is that animals cannot love. And oh my God, this is ridiculous. If animals cannot love, why would a cat feed its kittens when it comes at a detriment to itself? Valley says that humans can love because we love, but there is no analysis as to why our conception of love is any different from the conception of love that animals feel, meaning it's entirely assertive why human beings experience emotions. The claim here is that we are human, and thus we know that human beings experience things. But the obvious problem with this logic is we don't have epistemic access to what other human beings experience. We only know what we experience as an individual, so we can't apply that universally to all of humanity because we don't know if human beings feel the same level of love that we feel for them. We don't truly know if our partner loves us as much as we love they do. This is uncomparative to animals, and therefore Robi's frame on ontological evil is still enough to win the debate. For all those reasons, I am proud to propose.
I think the government would for that speech, and to close this final, I call on the with Bharath. Here, here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. The case of closing opposition is that this is a terrible, terrible idea because it hurts humans. Even if animals have value, humans matter more, and this is why we win the round. Gareth gives you two reasons why we hurt humans. One, that now you can't take vaccines. I want to respond to what they say about it only lasts for a couple of weeks, it's only an allergic reaction. This doesn't respond to the reason that vaccines need to be wrapped in animal stuff. The reason why it's wrapped in animal stuff is so you aren't allergic to it. It's so, without going too deep into the science here, so that the receptors in your body don't recognize it as something foreign and therefore will uptake it rather than destroying it. This means that if you make it allergic through another reason, that is when they won't uptake it and will destroy it instead. You defeat the whole purpose of wrapping it in animals. So that's why the OGPOI and CO response don't work. Now, when they, on their side, through the mechanism and the emotion, you make people allergic to the vaccine. It's not about the unpleasant effects. That was not our harm. The harm was you don't get to take the vaccine. You take it and it doesn't get into your bloodstream. It doesn't get into your cells because you are now allergic to it. So I don't think the response works that you are just have unpleasant effects because that wasn't the harm. The point is you inject yourself with a malaria vaccine, but you're not immune to malaria because your cells have recognized as something that you are allergic to. Even if you ignore that, see you have another path to victory that is ignored entirely. Gareth explains that tomorrow, 8 billion people are going to wake up and realize their governments have poisoned them. At best, this makes them distrust the government, the doctors, and science. They don't support funding for science and research. They don't go to hospital anymore. They don't trust governments, which leads to a whole host of harms when they don't engage with their services, so you don't trust their authority. It leads to a loss of life when people don't go to hospital anymore. But that's the best case. At worst, this leads to riots, protests in the streets. This is not unrealistic. If I was infected without my consent and changed permanently, I'd protest. I'd go out on the street. I think all of you would too. I think the OIV knows that this is something that a lot of people are willing to do. Massive chaos and instability because of how angry people are, if not bloodshed. This is a bad utilitarian harm, even if you want to believe the CG. Let's talk about what the other teams bring you. CG bring you a couple of things. The first thing they say is that utilitarianism is correct because it is intuitive. The opposite is true. Utilitarianism is pretty damn unintuitive. Think about the common cases of should you cut someone up who comes into the doctor healthy to save 5 people? Most people say no. Should you assault someone who is unconscious if they won't feel it and you get a lot of pleasure from it? Most people would say no. I think the opposite is true, that utilitarianism is unintuitive. Not sure why you're thumbs upping, guys. Okay, secondly, on humans being evil. Look, both humans and animals cause animals to suffer. CG say the difference is agency. But this contradicts their framing. The fact that you don't care only about consequences, you start caring about agency, is the opposite of utilitarianism. But even if you ignore that, let's say this is an even if tier from CG, I don't think humans share this intuition at all. I think most of us don't want to think that we are guilty and complicit. Most of us want to think that we are innocent and morally good. So if the case that they wanted to hang their hat on was intuitionism, which is at the first 4 minutes of Robert's speech, I don't think that people share these intuitions at all. Here's the reason why. If people shared your intuition, they'd voluntarily take this. The fact you're forcing them shows people don't share the intuition at all. Third response, we just beat this, like our case demonstrates utilitarian harm, except all that they say we show there's more utilitarian harm. Let's talk about the top half. And I think the main way we respond to opening government is on weighing between animals and humans. This is how we intervene in the top half. Look, we take a lower burden than OO. They say the animals have no real value. The burden we take is that animals could have value, but less than humans. It's not a dichotomy between no value and 10,000 Holocaust. There's a middle ground, which is it's bad to hurt an animal, but not at the expense of a human. Why is this true? And I think the POI I give is important, right? Biser says my POI is whimsical, but tigers are hungry in real life. I don't get it, right? Regardless of human intuition, and regardless of human intervention, by their logic, the animals matter more. A human should dive in the way of a tiger about to kill a deer because humans matter more. Genuinely, I don't think this is an intuition any OIV in any part of the world shares. If this is true, every time a lion eats a zebra, we should treat it as morally equivalent to a murder. We should lock up all the lions for committing murder. We should generate all our police force resources to making sure the lions don't kill zebras. It sounds ridiculous, but that's because the case from opening government is ridiculous. Look, these are strange and bad intuitions that I don't share and I don't think you share. Let's be clear about the impacts. Opening government at best prove we should care about animals because they are like humans. I'm quoting Prime Minister, they have human-like qualities, but they never say that they are the same as humans. So at best, they prove that animals have some value, not equal or more value to humans, because I think these are very bad intuitions. What does this mean for the debate? We support stuff that helps animals, but not at the cost of human lives because humans have greater value. Closing opposition demonstrates two independent ways in which lives are sacrificed on governments when vaccines are no longer effective and when you have massive protests because people are very, very angry. This means that we outweigh the opening government because we prove that humans are more important. It also just beats the CG, right? By proving that it's not immoral, that humans matter more than the animals, we prove that humans aren't evil because they're just prioritizing what is of greater moral value. So it is not true that humans are evil. I think this also beats the second closing government claim, even if you ignore the responses I gave before. Yes, OG.
Our analysis is pluralist, evaluating why a variety of widely shared moral intuitions imply severe ethical compromise under status quo.
Yeah, but the compromise position is not animals matter more than humans. I think the compromise position is ours, which is more akin to what people share. For all the intuitions I just told you, that animals could matter, but matter less than humans. Finally, weighing over opening opposition. Number one, OO fuck their own impacts in the second speaker. Alek says, I quote, I don't care about utility. He also says, who knows what is bad? Pain doesn't exist. So then why are all your impacts about the economics of the meat industry? If you really don't care about utility, then surely you don't care about your first speaker's impacts at all. Okay, fine. You know what? Let's take them at their best. Our practical impacts are much better than theirs. Gareth explains to you that people's starving point is incredibly marginal because starving people can't afford the most expensive type of food, which is meat. On the economic crisis, I think that the crisis that we demonstrate when people lose faith in governments, when there is instability created, when 8 billion people are incredibly angry about this, is far worse than compared to one industry who, let's face it, in a couple of years will probably get jobs in the now suddenly booming plant and soy and almond industry on their side of the house. So I don't think that their practical harms outweigh ours at all. And if you think about it, there's nothing much else left on opening opposition, because the rest of it is all the analysis as to why animals have no value. Whether you believe this, we don't really care. But the point is, you don't need to believe that to believe op bench. All you need to believe is not that they have no value, but that humans are more important than animals. I think across two speakers, we have comprehensively demonstrated that. Look, vaccines are kind of good. Even if you don't believe that, instability is kind of bad. Don't make people angry. Don't fuck up their immune systems. Don't poison 8 billion people. We're so proud to be CEO.
I think I'll wait for that point speech. And I thank you all for what was a wonderful final. And now can I ask my panel to meet me in breakout room 1